Chris. How's it going?
Feeling all right. How's it going with you?
Pretty good, pretty good. Can't complain. Um, so I know we didn't really discuss a specific topic for today. So if you want to just take it where you might have wanted to go, and maybe you have some things you wanted to talk about as far as like your show that you're doing with the church, or if you just want to just go on a separate tangent, whatever you feel like doing, and I'll just, make simple commentaries or whatnot.
Yeah, it kind of, let me see. I kind of feel like yeah, we should talk about that. I think it's very interesting. So about a year and a half ago, I guess I got my first invite to speak at a local church. A friend of mine, an acquaintance of mine, somebody I knew from a workplace, was a um he was a military chaplain who had a common interest in apocryphal works, and we would talk about them from time to time. He was Jewish roots and into like Old Testament roots and studying that stuff. And anyways, but we had a common interest. He was writing books about the Maccabees and things like that. And so we had things that we kind of would talk about from time to time. We had kind of a shared interest. And anyway, so he did invite me once to speak at his church, and I had never spoken in a church before because I don't know, I just didn't see myself there, you know,
Yeah.
which, but what was interesting was that I found that where I went was it was kind of a small, kind of close knit group. I mean, if you put them all together in the same room, there'd probably be 40, 50 different people that ever go to this church. That's just not a very big, mega church or whatever. But one thing that they all kind of have in common is that they're very studied. They're very knowledgeable. So I like to think of them as kind of a select group who knows why they're there, and they're there to, study and to learn and stuff. And so the stuff that I was saying really took well with them. You know what I'm saying? Because they were already talking about these things in the churches, or in their church. And so it seemed like a really nice fit. It's a place then about 45 minutes away from where I live. It's not super duper close, but I mean, when you think about it, that's pretty close, for
Right.
for something like this to be going on. But I've barely been encouraged because I want to encourage people to do this if they go to church, or to go to churches and see if there are people who are open to these ideas because, it just seems to me like it took better than I thought it was going to take. And I thought, you know what? It's such a powerful like argument. The whole foot in the door, for example, is like what we talk about on a consistent basis, which is the interrelationship between Second Peter and Jude, right? And just why
Right.
that exists. And it's something that I kind of drive home just about every week in my videos, as you know, but I think it's important because again, this is kind of the foot in the door that we have with theologians and also with the people of the world and the various other religions that are out there. Because, it's a little bit like if you're able to suss out this the the essential message, I guess, contained, the secret contained in it. It's something like an illusion that you see through. And all of a sudden, once you recognize that it's there, it's like you wake up out of a dream. And that's the effect that it's supposed to have. Because, like we discuss every week, and stop me anytime you want, but I mean, we discuss every week sort of the importance that the apostles and the writers of the canonical scriptures placed on these documents. And as you begin to allow the prophets and the apostles to simply speak for themselves and not, you speak on their behalf or you impose some kind of framework, you know when Jude, for example, says that Enoch the seventh from Adam prophesied of these men who were at the time infiltrating the church, the people he talks about in such derogatory terms throughout his letter, you know, they're godless people or whatever creeping into the church, right? And he says that Enoch wrote about them, that he prophesied actually about them. He didn't say that he just wrote or whatever. He calls him a prophet. And so it's interesting, because if you turn those statements around, why would he have to say that? Why would he have to say the name? Because he's owning the book. There's people out there, in other words, who aren't owning the book that he's countering, right? And he's
Mhm.
countering also people who question the antiquity of the book. By answering the question that he is the seventh from Adam, he's also answering to us that people had these questions about its antiquity. And we see that reflected in modern times. Like, we see today people calling it a pseudepigraphon. And and academia always is going to label it as and no earlier than the 303rd century BC, as far as its origins, because that's what scholars and theologians are kind of linked in that way. They're very academic. And it goes along with the whole tradition of the canon and everything.
Mhm.
But the idea is that that like I said, Jude's owning it. He's saying the name of the book, right? He's giving it its antiquity. He's saying he's the seventh from Adam. He's giving it the the title of prophecy. He's saying that he prophesied of these men. So there are evidently people who didn't think that the book was genuine prophecy, right? Because he's countering them. He's having to say it because people have those questions. So the answers are always in response to a question, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So do you accept the book? He claims the book. So that's clearly an answer to that question, right? Is the book ancient? Yeah, he's the seventh from Adam. That's clearly an answer to that question, right? So you can derive the questions from the answers. And it's interesting when you look at it that way, because he is answering questions. They had questions as to its validity. They had questions as to its antiquity. They obviously had questions as to its relevancy. It was of these men that Enoch prophesied, as a matter of fact. And it's going to be prophecy all the way to the end times, when he says that the Lord cometh with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment, right? So what's interesting is that particular statement, it's funny how that interfaces with the Epistle of Peter, because that is the power and the coming of the Lord. And when Peter says that we did not follow cleverly concocted fables when we told you about the power and the coming of the Lord, right?
Right.
But we were with him on the sacred mountain and all that. But the interesting thing about that is that um the way that Jude appeals to the apostles, he says this is something that the apostles preach, right? And um so apparently what's interesting about that is that that letter was then apparently manifestly, really demonstrably taken to the apostle Peter. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Ostensibly to Peter, right?
Mhm.
That's just reading it at surface value. Now, the interesting thing is, and I just want to make it clear, I mean, the scholars are probably not going to ever accept at face value that Enoch genuinely prophesied as the seventh from Adam, and that the book, they're probably never going to come around. But what I'm saying is, there's a certain internal logic that if you follow it, if you follow if an easy way to understand this, if you're skeptical, or if you don't a believer in Christianity, it's that in Jude's mind, Enoch was ancient,
Mhm.
right? And that is also his assertion. For you Christians out there who believe in the words of the prophets and regard the Bible as prophetic and Jude as a prophet, you have to understand that it is a prophet telling you that this book is prophetic. You have to understand that it is a prophet telling you that this book is ancient, right? And so
Right.
here you are. Who do you choose? Do you choose to listen to the prophets, or do you choose to listen to men? Because that seems to be where this line is drawn. And so he makes this claim that it is apostolic in teaching. So he owns a book, cites its antiquity, cites its prophetic nature. He talks about that it is relevant to the people of his age who are creeping into the church, right? So
Right.
evidently these people were against the book of Enoch when the apostles were teaching it, because then they took the book manifestly to Peter, because Second Peter is basically commentary on that book. He takes the book of Jude and writes around it, right?
Mhm.
And some of the questions that he answers are like, for example, like I mentioned before, we did not follow cleverly concocted fables when we told you about the power and the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. So what it was they were using the book of Enoch to proclaim the power and the coming of the Lord Jesus Christ based on the apostolic. Like, in other words, they were sent out to do this. Like, this is kind of an indication of their apostolic mission.
Can I
When
pause one second?
when we were telling, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I want to comment on this just because I have it up in front of me, but I'm reading from the first book of Enoch, but it's the bear with me one second. I just gotta find my place. So I think it's the version that's from the Library of Congress that I had mentioned in a previous video that we did together. But this is what it says: the fathers, all with possibly the one dissenting voice of Tertullian, deny the canonicity of this book, which is Enoch, and properly regard it as apocryphal. Some going even so far as to deny the canonicity of Jude because he had dared to quote an apocryphal work.
Right.
The precedent for this step was given in the Apostolic Constitutions. I think chapter 616, it says in strong words, when after the time of Augustine, the period of literary death robbed the church of many of their noblest monuments of literature. The book of Enoch, too, was lost, and later investigators had to be content with the references in the Fathers and a few extracts made by the learned monk of the 8th century, Georgius Syncellus, in his chronography. A short time after him, in the 9th century, the book is mentioned as an apocryphon of the New Testament by the patriarch Nicephorus. So that's just explaining what you're saying. It's actually been written down in a book, by people that, know this happened back in the day. So this book's from 1886. So they were writing about this very thing we're talking about 100 years ago. And I had mentioned some of this introduction in a previous video too. But
Well, I mean, but that just goes to show you that not only was this book not accepted, it was actively destroyed. The
right,
book was anathematized and destroyed. So there was a concerted effort to keep this book out of the hands of the people. And the only reason why we have this book is because the Ethiopian church managed to hold it in their canon this
right,
entire time, actually. So, at least as far as their church is concerned, they have always had that book and held it as canonical scripture. So, it hasn't really left, the planet per se, just every place outside of there. It was gone and it was missing for thousands of, over 1,000 years because of what, the churches actually did to destroy this book. And
right,
yet here it was, okay, but see, you see how that evidence is against them. Because if
right,
you read it at face value and you just let God be true, even though every man disagrees, so let God be true and every man a liar, therefore, right? If they all say, well, he's not ancient, you can say that Jude says he is. And then they have to cite against you and Jude. They have to then say, well, Jude is wrong and you are wrong, right?
right.
And then evidently the letter is brought to Peter. And then people will say, and again, Jude and Peter, I mean, just to be intellectually honest, right? Jude and Peter were among the letters that were in dispute. They were the letters that, but I mean, again, the fact is that they were canonized. But what's interesting is, even putting that aside, even if you're a skeptic, even if you're an atheist and you refuse to believe canonicity at all,
Mhm.
even imagining that those two books were made up, they were designed. I mean, if that were to be the case, they were still designed to make that point and to
Right.
make that assertion. These were two books that some evil, sinister person or whatever put together to say that oh, the apostles said this, and oh, I'm going to pretend to be an apostle and I'm going to say, you know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
yeah. It doesn't
But
make
it's
sense.
still the point of those letters, is what I'm
Right.
saying, is that regardless of how far-fetched you want to make your excuse not to believe these books, right? That still is the point of those letters. So if you're a Christian, you are bound to accept it because those are the words of the prophets. And as a skeptic, you are bound to accept it because intrinsically that's what it is. So
Hmm.
even if you think it is a complex fraud or even a cleverly concocted fable, right? The fact is, it still is the point of those two letters.
Mm-hmm.
So that
It says
it means something objectively, because it means it's true for the skeptic and it's true for the believer.
says in volume 1 of the Parasha Bereshit, I think it has to do with Genesis, there is a remark that covers about the same ground, with the additional statement that the Book of Enoch was handed down to him from the time when he began to associate with super-terrestrial beings. The existence of such a Book of Enoch made certain from these numerous quotations was the source of considerable perplexity and anxiety to the Christian theologians, and numerous and curious were the conjectures concerning its authorship and character. So that right there is saying that that's the same conversation that was happening back then. They were having curious conjectures concerning the authorship and character. So that's what Peter and Jude are discussing when they're talking, about their books together, basically. So it was something that, like you had said, it seems to have been something that was prominent back then, and it's also prominent now. And it's interesting that I can't believe nobody ever thought to check to see if Jude and Peter could be put together to make that third, more complete book, because it's so evident that there's so many verses in Jude that match what's in Peter. You know what I mean?
It's
So
very,
nobody
it's
really
very
tried.
interesting, because all of these things are spiritually discerned. That's what the Bible tells us. There's the kind of logic that men follow, because men believe in the framework of the material reality, when in fact the material reality is God's creation. And if it is basically held together by his kingdoms and his orders and his powers and his angel, it's somehow held together by all of these mechanisms of heaven, which some other prophets go into at length. But that being said, these people, they take that framework to be reality, right? When in
Right.
fact it is a creation, and God is creating this, and they're believing in something that is orders of magnitude beneath God as a reality, right? And they don't
Right.
stop to understand that everything, simplicity itself is eternal in nature. I say this all the time: 1 + 1 = 2. When did that start? When will it
Right.
end? Right? Because it's clearly something a child can understand, but you can't conceive of a beginning. You can't conceive of an end, because it just is true. So when God says to you that I am what is, right? You can understand that what is, there is no beginning to it. What is, there's no end to it. It just is, right? 1 + 1 is 2, and God is what is, right?
Right.
So it's just as simple as that. I mean, people write volumes upon volumes upon volumes to try to explain God, and there probably are these facets to him, but at the heart of it, everything boils down to simplicity.
Mm-hmm.
The Jude makes the assertion that this is the apostolic teaching, and then the book is evidently brought to Peter, who is, some say, the chief apostle, but an apostle nonetheless, and he says, yes, we the apostles taught this. So he's seconding Jude. He's clearly defending. And Jude says, listen, you have to fight for the faith that was once for all delivered to the saints, right? And he uses that book, and then that book is brought to Peter, and Peter fights for it. And how does he fight for it? He clearly fights for it. He clearly states, for example, you hear this refrain. He talks about the world of old was destroyed by the flood. The old world, right? When he speaks of the old world, he's speaking, of course, of the pre-flood or the antediluvian world, right? And even the book of Enoch, actually, we were just talking about this at church today. We had gone over this. If you want to check out this sermon, it'll probably be out, next week or something. But in Enoch chapter 37, again, which I was just reading today and last week too, actually, we read this. It says, and this is the beginning of the words of wisdom, which I lifted up my voice to speak and to say to those which dwell on earth, hear ye men of old time, and see ye that come after the words of the Holy One, which I will speak before the Lord of the spirits. It were better to declare them only to the men of old time, but even from those who come after, we will not withhold the beginning of wisdom, right? So the idea is that if the world of old is always with reference to the antediluvian world, and Enoch himself uses that term in his book to speak about those of the antediluvian world. Again, he says it would be better to declare them only, or the world to them of old time. But even from those who come after, we will not withhold the beginning of wisdom. So in other words, he's speaking of a pre-diluvian or an antediluvian. It would be better just to have spoken to them, but we see that none of them listened, because Peter's
Mhm.
very careful to tell us that Noah was the eighth man. In other
Yep.
words, his wife and his sons and his daughters, or his sons' wives, right, all made it in, and he was the eighth one after them, right? So that means that nobody else was on board, obviously. But the point was that he also calls him a preacher of righteousness, and he got nobody. You see what I'm saying? That's how
Yes.
bad the old world was, right? And just as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be at the end times, right?
Yep.
You know, we're preaching to a very small circle of people, because for what it's worth, it's as if we're shrouded in darkness. But see, Peter talks about himself as being a light that shines in a dark place, right?
Mhm.
As if to say that the darkness that is in our hearts, in our minds, in other words, that which we project out into the world around us, and is reinforced by the world around us, and it all forms a vicious cycle of ignorance, right?
Yes.
That we learn, that we live, that we pass on to others like a disease, and we don't know that we have it, right? It is like a blindness that we don't know we have. It's like a deafness that we don't know we have. It's like a muteness we don't know we have. It's like an inability to perform the works of God. Our hands are withered, right? It's as if we cannot walk the paths of God, as if our feet are lame. You know what I'm saying? It is as
Yes.
if we are dead and we cannot speak life to the world, right?
Mhm.
But now we can, because
Right.
if you just go with the prophets and say what they say, this whole scenario comes out before you. Now we understand the mission of the apostles. If Jude's preaching from the book of Enoch, and he says that this was from the apostles, right? And he's not just making that statement on his own. He's careful to say that he's the brother of James. Remember, James talks about the engrafted word. He talks about how let nobody take your crown. We talk about, these books are all related, right?
Mhm.
I mean, they're all on the same page if you read them, but you have to read them with the eyes of faith, because it only takes the faith of a mustard seed. How hard is it to believe that Enoch is ancient if Jude says he's ancient? How hard is it to believe that he's prophetic if Jude says he's prophetic, right?
That's
But these
true.
people that you were talking about, right? These people that
Yeah.
came, they took that word, they destroyed that word, they hid it from us, they confiscated it, they burned it, they banned it. You know what I'm saying? And all we had were bits and pieces here and there, and odd descriptions and little fragments, and allusions here and there, but it wasn't the book itself. They didn't even preserve that for us. God preserved that for us. He took
Right.
it far enough away from them, that it could survive. And he gave us enough to know that that book is the same book basically as they had at the old times with the Dead Sea Scrolls. So we could put two and two together, right?
Right.
Um, but anyways, the point is that if you watch this series, like I started out a long time ago with that church, the first thing I talked about was the super gospel, and then we talked about the harrowing of hell for a few weeks, and
Yep.
then we moved on to the gospel of Thomas, and when we went through the entire gospel of Thomas, so we've exposited all of this stuff together. And then we moved on to Second Peter and Jude, and then we moved on to the 7 letters of Revelation, and now we're taking all of that knowledge, all of those insights, and applying it to the book of Enoch. So it's kind of like a big, large sort of exposition,
Mhm.
of how it is that we get to this point. And
Right.
then now that we're at this point, right, what do we do? And all of that, is in an actual church, which is great, because I'm thinking, if I can do it, if you can show this to other people and say this is happening, you know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? That we can win over the churches.
Well,
That I
it
think
says that
ultimately that, uh-huh.
on page 23 here, just a side note, but um says the Greek text of the Ascension of Isaiah recently discovered, and it's talking about this happening in 1878. So I personally went to Christian school my whole life. I never even heard of the Ascension of Isaiah until I found the Super Gospel, in which you intertwine the Ascension of Isaiah into, I believe, the part where it talks about Jesus coming down through the 7 layers of heaven into Mary's stomach, because I think that's something that Isaiah saw when he was in the spirit, and then they cut him in half after he came back because Satan was pissed about it.
Well, okay, and so you have a canonical witness in the book of Hebrews, because the book of Hebrews attests to him coming down through the heavens,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it
Mm-hmm.
also attests of prophets being sawn in two, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is
Right.
also from the martyrdom and ascension of Isaiah, right? So we
Right.
know that the author of Hebrews is reading these books, right? And what's interesting too is that sawn in half bit, that's in the chapter of faith, right? So if you're gonna go
Mm-hmm.
read Hebrews chapter 11 and the faith is this and faith is that, it's a substance, you know what I'm saying? But then you
Yeah.
get to the end and he's making allusions to the book of Maccabees, he's making allusions to the ascension of Isaiah, right? He's making
Right.
allusions to the martyrdom of Isaiah, right? How is it that you cannot get through the chapter of faith without losing faith? See
Exactly.
what I'm saying? You can't make it
Yeah.
through that chapter. That's a setup. You have to understand that's an obvious trap, because that's one of those gotchas.
Yeah.
There are foils for every argument, and so it talks about every mouth will be stopped. And even the devil himself will have to confess.
Yeah.
That he lost, right?
Yeah.
Because
Right.
again, every mouth will be stopped, right? Again, there's an answer for every question, right? If you
Right.
just believe what the prophets are telling you and you just take their advice and you apply it and you take the ball and you run with it, right? It's told to us that we have to, to put our hand to the plow and not to look back,
Well,
right?
I don't see how people can't understand that Jesus said to him who, in Revelation, which is canonical, Jesus said to him who overcomes, and him meaning all Christians basically, or people, to him who overcomes will I give to eat of the hidden manna. So manna is heavenly food, and we eat the word basically. So it's a spiritual thing that we all do as Christians. We read the word and it penetrates our hearts and we learn from those things. So, and it happened in the Old Testament as a symbolism when he fed the people the manna. So I don't understand why that's hard, but apocrypha means hidden. So it's strange that people haven't made that simple connection. To him who overcomes, I will give to eat of the hidden manna. You can just replace that with apocryphal manna, basically, because it's just the same word. Hidden is apocrypha, and yet for some reason, some Bibles. I have many Bibles that are old. The Jerusalem Bible, which is Catholic Bible, like a couple, the Revised English Bible in front of me has the apocrypha in it still. But most times when you go to the bookstore nowadays, they don't have the apocrypha in the canon. So, and like you said prior to this, show, that the canon does nowhere speak of itself in the Bible. So there is nothing in the Bible that says the canon. So it is a contrivance of man to say certain books are in and certain books are out, because in the past they even tried to get rid of Revelation, and as you heard me say earlier, they were trying to get rid of Jude because he mentioned Enoch. So it just baffles my mind that's still going on. But you said
It's
it's a
it
it's a fog still. So
it's supposed to be like that.
right.
I'll tell you what, because when Jesus says that my yoke is easy and my burden is light, when he says things like, listen, all it takes is faith the size of a mustard seed, right? It comes with the idea that there's a very simple and probably in your face obvious. Have you ever just looked at something and not seen it?
Yeah.
And to just like taken aback by, my goodness, how did I not see that? Or maybe you're dating somebody or something and everybody saw it except for you. You know what I'm saying? You can be
Yeah.
blind to things, right?
Sure.
You can be blind to things, right? And it's just a blindness because we're so sure about see the Acts of Andrew makes it very clear how it is that we are taken in, because it goes on at some length about how it is that the devil presents himself to us as our friend. We see this in Judas too. He blesses the Lord, hail Rabbi, you know what I'm saying,
Yep.
and kisses him, right?
Mhm.
So it's a feigned sort of affection. It's a false friendship, right? So when the
Right.
devil comes to you and says, "Oh, these words aren't worthy enough. They don't speak worthily of," you know what I'm saying, and
Right.
he comes at you like that, but he's a total sleazebag, because what he's trying to do is by telling you that some things are better than others. Remember how Paul informs us that it's not yes and no, it's all yes, right?
Hmm.
So if you just let God be true and every man a liar, you will inevitably arrive at this conclusion, right? Why was that letter brought to Peter? Why did he say, yes, this is apostolic, if it were not the apostolic teaching? The apostles taught this because you have to understand Jesus through the eyes of Enoch, the Son of Man prophecies. He is that Son of Man. In the book of Luke, right, where he says, this is the elect one, hear him, right? So when
Hmm.
Enoch calls him the elect one, all right, you're putting two and two together. These books are linked. Jesus actually is the embodiment of the prophecies of Enoch,
Hmm.
which they speak directly of him. You know, and so even for the skeptics out there who want to say, oh, this book is just a few hundred, whatever years before, whatever, it still spoke of it, right?
Right.
Still there, right? So all of this stuff about him still came to, fruition after that was said. So it's still prophetic. You know
Right.
what I'm saying? So it doesn't matter how far how ludicrous you want to make your excuse. Every mouth will be stopped. All of these things have foils, and all of these things, and you know who put them there. They're there to stop people's mouths, and it's supposed to be so in your face obvious that everybody who sees it's like, yeah, how did I miss that, right? But when
Mhm.
the Gospel of Thomas talks about this too. He says when they shake off their wine, right?
Right.
I mean, and in the gospel of truth, it talks about how they walked around in a fog, those of the middle, right? That they
Yep.
couldn't see where they were going, right? That's what it's been. It's the whole confusion. Some of this stuff was taken away. See, what was given to Peter, the apostle, was that he was given the key that whatever he bound on earth would be bound in heaven. Whatever he loosed on earth, he loosed in heaven, right?
Hmm.
Peter was given that specific key because as we can demonstrate, right?
Hmm.
In the second book of Peter, he made sure that he could lock everything up with that letter, but make it possible for everything to be unlocked by using that same letter. Because the skeptics and the critics and all that said, well, he didn't exactly use Enoch's prophecy, for example. So maybe he was playing that down. But he was very clever because he didn't say, behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment upon. He summarized it. He said the power and the coming of our Lord Jesus, right? So in
Right.
other words, when you make that connection and you understand, oh, that's Enoch's quote, right? The power when we told you, we the apostles, right? Because Jude didn't say this on his own. He said this on the authority of us, the apostles, right? When he was telling you about the power and the coming, in other words, when he says Jude 14 and 15, behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of saints to execute judgment upon all, that's what he's talking about. That's Enoch's prophecy in Second Peter. But he made it so that a skeptic might not see that. You see,
Right.
he couched it just a little bit, right? To where if you weren't thinking correctly, you'd miss it. But if you were thinking correctly, it'd be as in your face obvious as it could possibly be, right? Again,
Right.
because it's supposed to be that easy. And why? To show because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, right? Because
Right.
because if people want to make the claim that this is a foolish, contrived, cleverly concocted fable, in other words, it's a pseudepigraphon,
Hmm.
a cleverly concocted fable. When we told you about the power and coming of Lord Jesus, when we told you about that, who's he talking about? Us and Jude, right? Because he's defending Jude. He's fighting for the faith that was once for all delivered to his saints. That's what he's doing. And all you have to do, it only takes the faith of a mustard seed. Jude claims the source, you can claim the source. Jude
Hmm.
says he's ancient, right? You can say he's
Right.
ancient, right? He says he's prophetic, you can say he's prophetic, right? And you can say that it bore on the people of his age who were against it, right? You can see that now, right? It's only the faith of a mustard seed. He said it, you say it. That's it. That's how
Yep.
easy and light that burden is.
Hmm.
That's how tiny that little mustard seed is. But all this time, that little tiny illusion, that was in people's minds kept them from seeing that, right? And
Right.
yet that's all it is, because it's just the tiniest little thing. You know what I'm saying? And yet it
Yep.
held back the entire age. That's how hard the devil had to make this. You know what I'm saying? By creating a canon that solves all of his problems, because that was what they did before. See, the Jewish establishment, I'm not talking about the genuine Jews, not the ones who knew the mystery, because those were in anticipation of the kingdom. And
Right.
you see that they were using that language. There were prophets who were using this language all throughout Jewish history. You know, when you see that there were people like, they say the Essenes or whoever the Dead Sea Scrolls community were, that those people held scriptures that the scribes and the Pharisees and the religious establishment did not. And
Hmm.
they lived apart from them because they thought they were unclean. You see, you get the idea that there were people who thought they were genuine, who believed in these other books that weren't in line with the canon, that weren't in line with the teaching of the scribes and the Pharisees. They didn't want to be a part of that establishment. They wanted that establishment to crumble and fail and to be
Hmm.
destroyed. They hated that establishment. They spoke of them in the most, hideous of ways, just like Jude does, just like Peter does. They speak of these people as being devils, and that is because they have to lie against the truth. When somebody is confessing the truth to you about this, and you see it just like I see it. Now imagine having a heart and a mind and a soul and a spirit that is capable of hearing what the guy said and still putting them to death, still, oppressing them, still taking away their truth and hiding it, right?
Right.
It is you actively denying the Holy Spirit, right? That is you actively acting as a Judas, right? To in the name of loving and purity, let's say the scriptures that you say are more exalted or more credible or more whatever, by lifting those up and saying, oh, those aren't to this standard, they're not worthy of this, by saying that they're not like these guys over here, these are the best, you know and there's so many like objective arguments against that. Like, for example, there's not even just one canon, for example. That's an
Right.
obvious one. There's tons
Right.
of canons. They can't all be right, right? And you can just know
Yeah.
that just on the surface of it. But because somebody could say, oh, mine is and yours is not, then we can all just sort of be against each other for this whole age, thinking that we're right when we're all wrong. And this pulls the carpet out from under all of that. They're all based on the idea of a canon, and a canon is an illusion. It doesn't exist. And so their whole authority can be undermined simply by the truth itself and nothing more.
Well, what's funny is I was reading, it's just a side note real quick, but basically I've always thought this kind of as a comparison, but I just was reading the Jerusalem Bible the other day, which I think came out in 1960. It's a Catholic Bible, and it has the Apocrypha in it still. But at the beginning of it, it says that the people that worked on it, like the specific people that worked on this version of the Bible, one of them was J.R.R. Tolkien, the guy who wrote Lord of the Rings, and because he's like a wordologist, I forget the name. It's like a weird word that he's into like ancient history and how words like
Is it
corresponded with each other.
etymologist, maybe? Yeah.
Something like that.
Philologist.
Yeah, it's a weird word. And then, so I've always thought this, but when you watch The Lord of the Rings, it's like he had the one ring to rule them all, but he gave all different like rings to other groups so that they would all fight amongst themselves about these lower rings instead of using the one true thing. And I've always thought of this teaching that way, like it's the one true teaching, but we all fight amongst ourselves about the different canons that we have and the different versions that we have. Like you said before, people always ask you, what church do you go to? Like, well, why do we have different churches? If Jesus wants to worship in spirit and in truth, we should have one, not three, like he rebuked Peter for on the mountain or whatever, when he says, get behind me, Satan, because he wants to build them a church for all three. So that's just the way I see it. But
Well, again, wherever two or three are gathered together in his name, like the whole concept of the name is kind of like, um, how, when it speaks of something to come, like, for example, it speaks of the coming Messiah, right?
mm,
It's as if he is being named, if you will, from before the time he is born. And then that there is a third generation when Yeshua speaks of, for example, I have sheep that are not of this fold, right?
Yeah.
Which I must go and gather. Now, a lot
Hmm.
of people have tried to apply this to themselves, and I'm not saying it doesn't apply. You know what I'm saying? I'm just saying that there is manifestly a third revelation because it's right there in front of your face and it can be demonstrated pretty easily and pretty readily.
Right.
You um, but the idea is that these people are in a sense named. I will give you a new name. I will give you a new stone, a white stone with a new name in it.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And these people are named. They are the elect. They are those who are to come. You know what I'm saying? And so the way that you know that is by being able to understand the scriptures. And by being able to understand the scriptures, you understand the name of Jesus that is in the Old Testament, right? Because he is spoken of in a sense and prophesied of, and therefore is being named.
Hmm.
So when you see the language, right, then you know his name because he's been designated. He's
Hmm.
been spoken of. He is to be the one, right? And when Yeshua talks about people to come, they are also being named, right? So they are spoken of in advance and called a certain thing, right? And so the way that you would know that is by understanding the way in which they are called, which is to say, by the secret understanding or the secret language,
Yeah.
right? To understand the name, you're understanding by extension the language that makes it possible for you to know who is being named and how they are being referred to, what their course of actions are, what their instructions are. Like we're given instructions, like we at the end we're told what to do. Like I don't know if you would watch the series on Revelation where we talked about the seven churches, right? But we ended up with the church. Well, there were two churches that didn't have any rebukes, right?
Philadelphia and something else, I think, right?
Well, it was Smyrna,
Hmm.
and well, in any case, the idea was that they didn't have a rebuke, but they also were promised the crown of life. You know, if you
Right.
and yeah, if you're faithful unto the death, I will give you a crown of life, right? So these are martyrs, right? That knew the
Right.
mystery in the early church. Now the earlier church, the church of Ephesus or whatever, these are people who once knew this stuff, but they
Hmm.
forgot it. They lost their first love. So
Right.
there were people who were killed for knowing the mystery, and there were people who forgot what they were there for. Like they didn't understand about the Peter and the Jude thing, right? They didn't understand that that was the whole bone of contention was the book of Enoch and all of these rejected books. Remember, James talks about the engrafted word, right?
Yes.
The idea that the word was that you had like the Jewish canon or whatever, but then Enoch and all this other stuff was engrafted into it, right?
Hmm.
And that's another reference to it. In other words, it was words that were added, right? So the idea is that was the teaching of the apostles. James was teaching that, go to James the just for whom heaven and earth have come into being, right? Because he understands
Right.
the heavenly and the earthly understanding both, right? And
Hmm.
so he talks about that and he talks about the crown too, right? And so in other words, you just put two and two together. I mean, you're looking for where like fits like, and you understand that it's not yes and no, it's just yes, right?
Right.
And once you grasp that, then there's no stopping you from understanding pretty much everything because you understand that everything has been laid out in such a way to make it understandable. You just have to make the way straight. You just have to make everything, you know, it you have to see the commonalities and the connections and not play up the differences and the divisions. That's the thing. Our minds are fragmented and divided because we're told to believe certain things and to deny other things. And that's all yes and no, but it's all yes. And so when you let it all just be yes, then everything just comes together. You allow it to. You're not forcing anything. You're forcing it when you're saying, well, just because, Jude quotes this book doesn't mean that it's the whole, that's what you're forcing. That's being shoehorned in to the word, the teaching of men is basically constraining waters. Remember how, like in the Odes of Solomon, talks about no man can take away your temple, whatever, and all the people whose jobs it is to constrain the waters, right? Those are the
Right.
people who are canonizing. They're constraining the waters. You
Oh,
see what
okay.
I'm saying?
Yeah, I
So, in
didn't
other
think of
words,
it like that.
you're just thinking in wholesome ways. Wholesome thinking is what Peter calls it. When you return to that wholesome way of thinking, right?
Mhm.
I want you to recall the words that were spoken in the past by the prophets through us, the apostles, is what he says. What are the words of the past? Book of Enoch. I want you to recall what they were speaking. You know what I'm saying? It's
Right.
all it's all a pathway that's laid out for us now if you understand it. See, because he talks about eyes to see. It's not forced. It's just seeing it, right?
Mhm.
It's not something that somebody's teaching you. It's something that you're hearing. So if you're hearing it, you have ears to hear. If you're seeing it, you have eyes to see. And so we talked about old time, right? The prophets of old, right? When we established that Peter's references to the old world, right? The old world was flooded, the old world was destroyed, right? He's talking about the antediluvian world. So when he says that the prophets of old, he's very specifically talking about the antediluvian prophets or the
Right.
prophets like Enoch. So Peter is backing up. He's saying that when we told you about the power and the coming of our Lord, it wasn't a fable, that the prophets of old, the prophets of antediluvian times, in other words, spake as they were moved by the Holy Spirit. That is an answer to the question of, is this stuff inspired? And
Right.
Peter, the chief apostle, to whom it was given to open and shut the heavens, right? He was given that key, and that is the key. You see it, then it's like, oh yeah, I understand it now. This is the key to opening up everything, right? And it's so obvious when you see it. It's almost as if you it can't possibly be true, and yet there it is. See, it gets you to understand his power over time and his power over the minds of men, so that
Right.
their eyes can be held the whole time he's with them, right? He says, behold, I'm with you till the end of time. Now you can see that. Now you can understand that, because now looking back on it, it was all spoken in prospect to be understood in retrospect, just like it was the first time around. They spoke of all the suffering servant, all of the things he was going to do as the suffering servant, right?
Mhm.
And those were the prophecies that he fulfilled, and in his first coming were all the sufferings, right?
Right.
But in his second coming, this is where all the Son of Man prophecies from Enoch come in, because they're all about him being the judge and the king. You know what I'm saying? And the
Right.
elect one, which is the title. Look, Enoch gives him the title of the elect one. And in the book of Luke, God himself gives him the title of the elect one. This is my son, the elect one. Hear ye him. Right?
Right.
So this bears on everything. Like it forms the greater foundation under which all of this can be understood and perceived, right?
Well,
It's not,
well,
it's
I guess
forced
I
God,
guess
it's
that
like emergent from the text.
e- I think the importance of Enoch is that essentially he was like the first prophet, basically, essentially, and not only, if not that, he was called the righteous scribe, and he wrote 365 books, and he met with God directly, and then he's going to be one of the two witnesses according to four other books that are not in the canon. Him and Elijah are going to be the two witnesses. So if I could just read something briefly, it's a little bit wordy, but it'll make sense in a second. And it goes into what I'm talking about, the importance of Enoch and why it is so important that we have it. Um, and so, and I say this because Enoch is from the beginning. Remember, Jesus said it's very important to go back to the beginning, and it'll make sense in a second. It says, one could experience this process returning to the prime evil beginning, entering the darkness and bringing light, not simply as a mythic story, but also in one's own awareness. This contemplative practice lies at the heart of one of the most interpreted passages in the Gospels, Yeshua's interview with Nicodemus, reported in John 3:3-8, in which Yeshua says in the King James Version, "Verily, verily, I say unto thee, except a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. Except a man be born of water and of spirit, he cannot enter into the kingdom of God. For born again The Aramaic version uses the word minderish, be born from the beginning, which again uses the same form for archetypical beginning as in Genesis 1:1, the word for water. Uses the same form as that in the Hebrew of Genesis 1:2, which also means the flowing chaotic darkness. The Aramaic word for spirit can also mean breath and parallels the Hebrew of Genesis 1:2 when the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. These clues show that Jesus advocated that Nicodemus recreate the creation story within himself by returning to the primordial darkness from which the light first arose, using his own spirit breath as a vehicle. The Gospel of Thomas quotes Yeshua advocating a similar spiritual practice in the following dialogue with his students. The disciples said to Jesus, "Tell us how our end will be." Jesus said, "Have you then discovered the beginning so that you acquire about the end? For where the beginning is, there shall your end be also. Blessed is he who shall stand at the beginning, and he shall know the end, and he shall not taste of death." Saying 18. So, in my opinion, for us to have Enoch at the end, when Enoch prophesied at the beginning that it would be for a remote generation that is to come, it makes more sense in the Aramaic as far as that's concerned to explain what those words truly mean. But yet somehow even in the English, we're able to take Jude and Peter and they decode each other, pointing us back to Enoch as well, which was a book from the beginning that prophesies about the end. And Jesus himself is quoted there in both canonical and non-canonical books stating the same exact thing. It's just profound to me. So go ahead.
Well, I mean, getting back to what Thomas said, the book starts out, whoever comes to understand the meaning of these words will not taste of death, right? And then he says that, why do you seek the end? Have you found the beginning yet? Because the end is at the beginning, right? And whoever comes to understand that the end is at the beginning, or that they will not taste of death. So the idea is that tasting of death is not having this knowledge. And the Bible echoes that by saying that to be carnally minded is death, right? So to be worldly minded, or to speak of the carnal mind, right, is to speak of death, because the carnal mind understands the book of Enoch to be 3rd century BC. The mind of man considers it to be a composite work. The mind of man, you see what I'm saying? That's to be carnally minded. So not to understand those things from Jude's point of view, because again, there's a way that seems right to a man, but the ends thereof are the ways, of course, of death, right? Because everything goes around on itself. You can see how they're all speaking from the same understanding, right? And if you have access to this understanding, how do you have access to this understanding? You read it, you listen to it, you affirm it, you understand it, and you understand that it all fits onto a single framework. It is a giant thought to know that it all hangs on itself. I don't know if you've listened to or read the latest or the last version of the Agrapha that I uploaded. But I put that together about the time I was doing the Gospel of Thomas series, because what I wanted to do was I wanted to take the Agrapha that I had from old and expand on it a little bit, because it's something because it's, little bits and pieces of Yeshua's sayings taken from here, there, and everywhere.
Right.
Then I wanted to take the Gospel of Thomas and put it into the Agrapha and integrate that into the Agrapha, as well as a lesser known gospel called the Gospel of the Savior. But because it's so fragmentary and because it fits so well, I found a use for it. So I took everything I could salvage out of that book and put it into the Agrapha as well. And what you'll find is, if you'll go through that, because it was ordered somewhat chronologically, I mean, there were things that had to be before other things, of course, but it wasn't, there's not a level of precision on there that you could make it chronological exactly, but you could do things kind of chronologically. It was more arranged thematically. But when you read that from beginning to end, considering all of the diverse sources that you'll read, and you'll see all the sources if you open up the captions, because the captions contain both the readings as well as the sources. You'll see that it's a little bit from here, a little bit from there, a little bit from here, a little bit from there, and just all over the place, right?
Are you
And yet,
talking about the agrapha or scattered words of Jesus, where it tells you on
yes,
the right hand side, like the Gospel of Thomas, the Epiphanius, and all these other things, like
yeah,
all the different people? Okay, just make sure.
yeah, that's it. I think that's worth a read, because that's one of those things that you couldn't possibly demonstrate the more a more understandable way in which, like, the way that something could seem random, a little
Hmm.
here, a little there, right, from this source, from that source, how you could put them all together, and they should be gobbledygook. They should make no sense.
Right.
They should be contradictory. They should be all, you know what I'm saying? And yet it forms such a logical, cohesive thing that it, if you really just arranging those things is something that I would listen to, just like I would listen to the Sermon on the Mount or anything else. It's just so noble and so thought provoking, and and just to see that it's all just a mishmash is shocking, because it's so cohesive. But that's the kind of thing that you come to understand, because everybody's on the same page. There was a mystery that was understood. There were
Hmm.
words that went out. John attests to this. He says that there were so many books that could have been written, that the whole world couldn't contain them all, right? That his reputation was so great and his word spread so far and wide, right, that you could literally gather up all the broken fragments of it,
Hmm.
and make a whole loaf out of it. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? It's just that's essentially what that work is, and it just stands as a testament. See, all I did was cut and paste. Like, I didn't even try to normalize the speech or anything.
Yeah.
So you'll
No, it
read
looks
one and it
awesome.
says thee and thou, and I'll read another one and it says you and your. You know what I'm saying? Because I
Yeah.
wanted to underscore the fact that this cohesiveness that you're hearing isn't me imposing it. It's just there. And
Oh, one
that's
sec, Robert, 1 second. For anybody that wants to know where this is, if you go to scriptural-truth.com, Robert's website that's hosted by one of his friends, so you want to donate to the website, it'll go to the person that's running it. So if you care to do that, it's an awesome thing. Most of what I teach on my channel, I've gotten from this website. So if you go to the free PDF section at the top and click down to past the first 17 books that are there, then you'll find the gospel of the Gospel of Thomas unveiled, and it says below that Agrapha plus Thomas and Gospel of the Savior. Click on that PDF and you can download it, as well as any of the PDFs that are on here. They're all free. So just go ahead, Robert. I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, I gotta tell you, because that's just a compilation, though. I can still stand in awe of it, because I know that it's nothing of my doing. It has everything to do with where the words themselves want to go, and
Yeah.
it's just such an awesome, just a visual, intuitive way of understanding just how cohesive this is. You see what I'm saying? And if it's that way
Right.
with little bitty fragments, from random sources
Mm-hmm.
throughout space and time, just out of waste bins and inscriptions on graves and stuff, it's just
Right.
here, there, and everywhere. Church fathers, obscure gospels, patristic citations, all kinds of different sources, and yet it all speaks of it just it all just sort of hangs together. It's astonishing, right? But that's the way it's supposed to be. It's supposed to strike you as being a work and a wonder. And I think that's what it is. In fact, Yeshua talks about this directly in the Gospel of Thomas. He talks about, if the flesh came into being because of the spirit, that is a wonder, right? But if the spirit came into being because of the flesh, that is a wonder of wonders. And yet I marvel at how this wealth um, has made its home in such poverty,
Right.
right? So in other words, you kind of make out that wealth and poverty are spirit and flesh. First off, I mean, that's just something you can get out of that whole presentation. But the idea is that what is the flesh and what is the spirit, right? See, the spirit is the higher level meaning, the spiritual meaning, right? And the flesh is the lower level, the fleshly meaning, right? So if the spiritual meaning has made its home in the fleshly meaning, that is a wonder. Because again, you were talking about that earlier. How did you not see this? How did you not see that? Right? Because that was the spirit making its home in the flesh.
Right.
So Yeshua actually makes a comment there. Yet I wonder at how this wealth, that spiritual wealth, has made its home in this fleshly poverty, right?
Right.
He makes that he's saying just to conceal all that was amazing to me. And yet, if the spirit then is able to be extracted from the fleshly, right? That is a wonder of wonders, because it was a wonder that he could hide it, right? Seeing how
Yep.
obvious it is. Because, like I mentioned before, all you have to do is claim the source, like Jude did. He claims it. Good enough for Jude. It's good enough for me, right? Could do that. Didn't do that, right? Could
Right.
say that he's a seventh from Adam, right? Because Jude said that. You could say that, right? It's just that easy, right? But that's not what happened,
Right.
right? See, that's faith of a mustard seed, tiny, tiny little. He even talks about that about the Church of Philadelphia, because you had just a little bit of strength, right?
Mhm.
Because you have had a little strength that will keep you from the time of tribulation. I mean, in other words, I'm going to hold you till the end, because you
Right.
just have a little bit of strength.
Right.
You could do that, right? Because how little strength does it take? You see what I'm saying? It's supposed to be super easy. It's supposed to be a super light burden, so that everybody who struggled with it, everybody who fought against it, everybody who was kicking against the pricks, in other words, making
Mhm.
things hard for themselves and everybody else. Because why? Because they wouldn't just go along with what God said. They just
Right.
wouldn't go along with it. And then that's why they couldn't put two and two together, because he hid the truth behind their inability to follow the truth.
Mhm.
You see what I'm saying? You can't fault him. He certainly was right there all this time, like a light shining in a dark place. Where was that dark place? Was our minds, our thoughts, right? And
Yeah,
our
but all throughout the Bible, though, people do things like that. Like Israel did it the whole time in the wilderness. That like they just fought with him about the dumbest things. Like, and you're like, why did they do that? Like that's what I say all the time. I'm like, why did you do that? It's so dumb. You had everything, and you just gave it away for nothing. And I feel like it's like a similar concept.
well, we have an enemy, and the enemy has a lot of functionaries and a lot of people. See, the thing about it is, it talks about our own personal sin. Every person sins because God doesn't make you sin. He doesn't tempt you, right? You are drawn away of your own lusts, right? This was
Right.
what Balaam was like. And Balaam is somebody, he's a commonly spoken between Jesus and the seven churches, and also he's mentioned by Jude and by Peter. He's brought up, right? Because
Hmm.
his weaknesses were, number one, he wouldn't just stand up against evil. He was like, I'm listening, right?
Yeah.
He could be bought off, right? There were things that he wanted that were more than the truth, and so he could be bought off, right? And certain people are just like that. They would rather have the things of this world. They would rather have the praise of this world. You know, like in the world of scholarship, like I don't travel in scholarly circles. I'm not a scholarly person at all. I'm just sort of a naive sort of I'm interested in this, so I'll study this. I'm interested in that, so I'll study that, and it's kind of random, but there's a definite madness to my method because it all sort of ties together. It's all just little bits and facets of the whole thing that I'm
Yeah.
trying to kind of put into perspective. And the more I do it, sort of the easier it gets, because it all just sort of is what it is, and it's consistent. And then when you find things, you know what to look for, and you know what to look for, and you find things, and you find things, and then you know what to look. You know what I'm saying? It feeds on itself, right? And so
Right.
it gets to the point where you can just articulate it and be glib about it, because there is a sense to it, there is a rhyme and a reason to it, and it all sort of hangs together and all makes sense when you get it. Right. So the idea is that to reduce it down to the simplest of things, right? The way in which Jude and Peter, for example, are given to us as tools in order to bring back the book of Enoch. Because one of the things it says about itself is that it's not for his generation, but for a remote one, which is for to come, concerning the elect and all that, but not for this generation, right? So, in other words, it's taken out and put back. This gives us the means of putting it back now that it's been taken out, right?
Hmm.
So it gives us the authority then to go out into the world and say, hey, listen, you were wrong. Everything that the whole canon, the whole teachings, or everything, it's all based on a lot of false premises, not the least of which is the canon, right?
Right.
You could add to that, you're not understanding the language, you're not hearing the voice, you're not seeing the images, you're not seeing the patterns, you're not seeing any of this stuff at all. You're teaching contrary to all this stuff because you just won't let the prophets be true. You know what I'm saying? You just
Yeah.
won't let God be true and every man a liar.
Right.
And they've really got no leg to stand on because they've all pretty much, picked this particular hill to die on. They've all died on the hill of the canon. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? And all you had to do was agree with Jude, and all of this stuff would open up to you. Who'd have thought it'd be that easy? But it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be in your face, obvious, to show off how foolish the wisdom of the wise is. It's all sort of an act of spite in a way, just like, you mean you didn't understand this, you didn't understand that, in a rhetorical kind of way, in in Jesus's time, he did the same kind of thing. Did you never read this? Did you never read this? Did you not understand this? Did you not understand that?
Right.
Right? And you're a teacher of Israel. You know what I'm saying? And those kinds of things, because they're supposed to have this knowledge and they don't. And the thing is, that's why they're voided of power. And the whole world is voided of power because, for heaven's sake, there's a God. Full stop. I've shown you that there is a God through his own works. There's no disputing that. Now, what are you going to do with that? You know what I'm saying? What are you going to do with that knowledge? I mean, Thomas, it tells you the same. It tells you exactly what they're supposed to do. Let him who has power renounce it,
Yeah.
right? Because those people have been shown, and the book of Enoch goes into that at length. These people have been shown that they, at best, are mistaken.
Right.
And in all honesty, they would not be mistaken if they had just, let God be true and every man a liar. If they had just stood up and, and been courageous and stood up against the establishment, right? Instead of going along with it, and playing the game, because a lot of people have gamed this. It's something that can be gamed. There's a lot of people making a lot of money off of this stuff, off of the
Mhm.
church, and there's a lot of people who use the church for power and wars and stuff, and they were just using and exploiting the name of the Lord and the word of God, right,
Mhm.
in order to justify, horrific things, and it's been a there are ways in which it was good for history. It was good to have a Christian teaching. It was good to have a Christian ethic. A person can imagine a world devoid of Christianity could have been a lot more off the rails, a lot
Right.
more brutal, right? A person
Mhm.
can understand that. But a person can also understand that because of institutionalized Christianity and because of the Christian mind disease or whatever that creates all of this confusion when you basically call the prophets liars, and you think that you're smarter, and you think that you can find a better way, explaining it on your own, right? There wouldn't be any need for all of these different teachings if people just understood what the prophets were saying,
Right.
right? And that was your job. You had one job. Your job was to affirm the prophets and to speak the word of God to the people, right? Regardless of the cost, to the death even, right? That was what was expected of you. You are just a servant, I am just a servant. We're all just servants. Your job is to bring the truth to the people that as laid down by God. That is literally your job, right? And when you say that this is not true, that this is a mistake, that this is something we're going to ignore, we're going to pick and choose what we read, we're going to pick and choose, you know what I'm saying? You're not letting it flow. You're not letting it all speak, right? You're restraining the waters. There's people out there who do that more or less innocently out of ignorance, right? And I believe there's forgiveness for them. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do,
Right.
right? So ignorance is kind of a basis for that. Maybe you can repent of that, right? But then
And
again,
they're
right?
he says that while they're crucifying the word. So that's also a spiritual thing. Like we've crucified the word, his word. So
That
we've
was one of those things that, like what I was saying about intuition, right? Once you get the hang of it, like that was something I had come to that conclusion before I ever read the Acts of John. Like, I give you an example. I mean, there's tons of other examples, but that's when I can sort of, you know, easily point to, because I had reason just in my spirit, right, that, if Jesus was the Logos, then them putting Jesus to death in the flesh was also them attacking the Logos. For
Right.
them spitting on Jesus was also them spitting on the Logos, right? It made sense to me that if he was the embodiment of the Logos and in a way symbolized it, and it's not just the Logos, it's the way. The way was destroyed, the truth was destroyed, the life was destroyed, right? All of those things that are his name were under the same attack as he was bodily,
Right.
right? So you can take it out to the nth degree if you really want to, right? But the idea was that the Logos, if you will, just as the man, and the man died as a symbol of all of these things, right? Because he was all of these things, right?
Right.
He is the way, he is the truth, he is the life, he is the Logos, right? All of those things were destroyed by men, right? And they were put to an open shame, and they were buried under the earth. In other words, under earthly teaching, under earthly terminology, under earthly ways. People were savage and brutal and ignorant and greedy, and they pursued their own love, their own lusts, and their own, and the Bible tries very hard to tell us these things, constantly refraining. The crooked cannot be made straight. You follow straight paths, right? Let God be true and every man. I mean, it just drives it home constantly, right? That God's ways are higher than man's ways, right?
Right.
Don't follow the pack, right? The people who were after David's or God's heart, for example, something like David, for example, who was fallible, to say the least, as a man,
Right.
at least when it came to God, he was pugnacious and bold,
Right.
and that was the thing, you know. He wasn't a perfect person, because no one is. Solomon wasn't perfect, nobody. I mean, you can't pick anybody. I mean,
Right.
Elijah wasn't perfect, right? There were a lot of people Jonah, I mean, I mean, it's just all of these people were not perfect people. They were fallible, and they had their so that's to underscore the fact that prophecy doesn't come from the head. It comes from the spirit. You open your mouth, and if God chooses to use your mouth, he will speak through it.
Right.
You open up your eyes, and if God gives you sight, and you see something that is, what I'm saying, you can share that with people. You can, but you become his hands, you become his eyes, you become his ears, you become his mouth. We are his members, right? And he can
Right.
act through us, just like he acted through the early apostles. Because what this is a watershed understanding. Okay, it's a revolution in Christian thought. A lot of times, and again, I'm not trying to denigrate any other, but this is the essential teaching. This is
Hmm.
the thing that actually makes it happen. A person could talk about other angles. They could talk about the Book of Enoch and focus on, interesting little aspects of it, right? But everything sort of starts with the validity of the word, right? The understanding of the spiritual. Unless you have that, you're still only arguing on the level of the carnal. If
Right.
you want to talk cosmology, or if you want to talk, history or whatever, that's all well and good. But if you don't have that higher notion that the
Hmm.
word of God is how should I say it? It's for a time of judgment and irrefutable proof of his existence. And
Hmm.
these are all irrefutable proofs of his existence, that he's able to do these things. That's like the primary thing. In fact, it spells it out. Um, so I
Says
was
it
just
right here. It says it
there are a
right
lot
here
of
in
things I
Barnabas.
was just reading today.
Says it in
Um,
Barnabas 10 too, also. But you go ahead with what you were going to say.
um, oh, yeah, okay, well, like what I was just saying before. Okay, so back in Enoch 37, for example, hear ye
Hmm.
men of old time, and see ye the that come after. In other words, the people after the anti-diluvian times, there's still a use for this book, because there's see those who come after the old time, in other words, which is the anti-diluvian time, right? The words of the Holy One, which I will speak before the Lord of Spirits, it were better to declare them only to the men of old time, but even from those who come after, we will not hold the beginning of wisdom.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So the beginning of wisdom, right, is to understand his words, right? He even goes on to explain what that is. Till the present day, such wisdom never been given by the Lord of Spirits as I have received according to my insight, according to the good pleasure of the Lord of Spirits, whom the lot of eternal life has been given to me.
Mhm.
And he goes on to explain to you that this is all found in his parables. So that's the introduction
Right.
to the section of the parables. But the idea is that the understanding of these things from his book, from his hand, right,
Yeah.
is the beginning of wisdom, right? This is why in Second Peter underscores this by saying, you know, that this sorry, my cat's meowing.
That's a,
That this is that this is the first thing, that this is the primary thing that you have to understand.
mhm.
Um, that he that we have been given a more sure word of prophecy, for example, right?
Mhm.
The idea, the reason why it is more sure is because you're able to say it with absolute impunity. Like you're
Mhm.
able to absolutely say that and absolutely hold your own and not have somebody have the ability to say, "Oh, that's just what you think." Because it's
Right.
just, no, that's what it is there, right?
Right.
This is clearly what is there. You know what I'm saying? And so,
And if that's not true, then why were they trying to get rid of Jude? Because they were trying to get rid of Jude because it proved that this is correct, basically.
well, what essentially you would glean from this is that there were people who were fighting for the faith.
Hmm.
That was and you see the thing about it is throughout the letters of Yeshua to the seven churches in the book of Revelation, you see this kind of satanic arc. You see the people coming in from the synagogue of Satan. Then you see that Satan has his seat, right? And by and then you see, like, for example, I will kill her children with death at Jezebel, whatever. She's gonna come in and she's gonna tell people that to eat food that is sacrificed to idols and to fornicate and all this other stuff that they
Yeah.
were
Right.
teaching, right? You can
Hmm.
see that this is a spiritual wickedness that has made its seat in the church,
Right.
right? You can
But
see that this
if
is a
that's the
spiritual kingdom.
if that's the thing though, Robert, Barnabas 10:2, yea, and further he saith unto them in Deuteronomy, I will lay as a covenant upon this people my ordinances. So then it is not a commandment of God that they should not bite with their teeth, but Moses spake it in the spirit. So what that's saying is that these people, when they were taught the ordinances of God in the Old Testament, in like Exodus or whatever, and all those Deuteronomy, Exodus, all the times where God was trying to teach them things, they all thought it was like an earthly thing, but it was a heavenly thing, a spiritual thing that they were trying to be taught. And that's why they get the food laws wrong when it was trying to teach them that pigs are false Christians, that go wallowing in the muck or whatever. And that's all spiritual things, but people still have arguments about not eating pork and all this other stuff. But it says right there, God. So then it is not a commandment of God that they should not bite it with their teeth. So people still to this day think that all these things are physicalities when they're actual spiritual maxims. And this is taught by Barnabas, who we took the book out. You know what I mean? So it just proves itself right there that people got rid of the importance of the spiritual and sort of took on their own interpretations. And
Well,
it says don't do that. It says do not, these things are not for private interpretation.
well, let's look at first things first then. If you're going to go that way with it, just go to Genesis, right?
Hmm.
You look at the creation, the days of creation, right? In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light and saw that it was good, and that it was good, and divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. So there's a couple of ways in which that the term night and day, for example, are used metaphorically throughout the Bible. It's no great mystery. It talks about, we are children of the day, we are not children of the night. If somebody walks around at night, they stumble at night. So it's no great shakes to think about evening and morning as being sort of having their metaphorical uses, let's say. In the Gospel of Thomas, he says, for example, do not worry from morning until evening, or from evening until morning, for example, what you will wear, right? The
Right.
idea of your clothing being, where are your clothing? Are you wearing the clothing of the flesh? Or are you wearing the heavenly garment, for example, right? The
Mm-hmm.
garment that's given to you in the bride chamber when you become one with the Spirit, when you become one with Yeshua. I will become that man. You know what I'm saying? And that, but the idea is that all of this stuff goes around in itself. But so there is a metaphorical reading of that. And if you take the simple, straightforward, used everywhere, understood, universal meaning of that, what is it saying? In the beginning, in the first place, in other words, like it's the primary thing, the first thing. And the first thing, God created the heavens and the earth, right? So he created the heavenly and the earthly. There is there is that which is heavenly, and there is that which is earthly, right? And the earth was without form and void. In other words, things hadn't happened yet. It was as if it was going to need to play itself out, right?
Right.
And it said, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. In other words, to read things on a superficial level is dark when there are
Mm-hmm.
deep things, right? So
Right.
the surface level reading leads to the darkness, whereas there are actually depths, right? And the
Right.
Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, right? Again, the superficial aspects of it, right? So the Spirit of God moved upon the superficial understanding of the water, which is the word, right? The cleansing of water
Right.
by the washing of the word, right?
Right.
It speaks of in Shepherd of Hermas, right? Why is the tower built on the water? Because the church is built upon the word of God. It's just the same thing, right? They're just
Right.
that's just how they're used other places, right? So why not use them here? And then he says, and let God be true. Oh, I'm sorry. God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw the light, and the light was good, and he divided the light from the darkness, right? So coming back into the light out of the darkness is that dividing. So
Mm-hmm.
the first, that was okay. And evening and morning were the first day, right? Evening is the loss of this knowledge, and the morning is the regaining of it, right? When the day dawns and the morning star rises in your heart, to him who overcomes, I will give the morning star, right?
Right.
These are things that happen to us metaphorically in our hearts and in our minds and spiritually, right? So the
Mm-hmm.
idea is that now that the Spirit is moving upon the surface of the waters, right? Then all of a sudden you get to see their depths, right? Because now the Spirit um has overcome, if you will, the darkness that was on the face of the deep. It's been replaced by light, right? So that's just a metaphorical understanding. And so um and then he says, okay, so then what would the next one then be if you were just to read it like that? Because Barnabas reads it like that, and he ends up with the 7 days, or the 7,000 years, and the seventh day, the Sabbath, right, is the culmination of the age, and that it is the millennium, essentially, the
Right.
thousand year rest, right, where there is no
Mm-hmm.
more sea. There's just silence in heaven for the space of half an hour, because it's times and half a time, right? Um, so time is 2,000 years, times is 4,000 years, and half a time is 1,000 years, right? So it's silence for half hour. And it says, and God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters, right? So again, what are the waters? The words, right? So you have words over here and words over here, words that are above and words that are below, right?
Right.
Book of Enoch talks about this too. It talks about the waters that are above are masculine, the waters below are feminine,
Yeah, and
right?
second Ezra from the Apocrypha says some words are for the wise and unwise, and some are only for the wise.
Yeah, and so there's a division. So when he
Right.
talks about the firmament, at least in the metaphorical sense, he's talking about the division that exists between, let's say, the canon and the non-canonical, the
Mm-hmm.
books. So, so that he's creating division. But you see what's forming here. You see
Mm-hmm.
the idea that this isn't just a creation story. This is a kind of a revelation. It's kind
Right.
of
Like
it's
all
kind
of
of like,
history.
well, like if he's saying that there were deep things that people hang on the superficial aspects of the word, but there's depths to them, right?
Yeah.
He then says that there's a division among these words, right? He means that the word is going to be divided from itself. So you're going to
Right.
have waters above and waters below, right? if that's what this means, right? I mean, they're just reading it according to the keys that they give you, right? God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day, right? So again, if we're children of the day, right? If the day is like the dawning, if you will, in your heart, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you use it that way, it means that this is sort of the second revelation or the second deep insight, the second really big thing you got to know, right? So
Right.
there's depths to the word and the words being separated. There's stuff that's held in up above. And he says, and let the water under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And we talk about, again, Shepherd of Hermas tells us that the tower of the church is being built upon the water. The word just tells us that outright. So if we just go with that,
Mm-hmm.
it says in the waters, and the dry land, of course, that's the secular. So you have the secular world and the church is being separated now. So now there
Right.
is religious body and now there's a secular body, right? And God called the dry land earth. Again, God created the heavens and the earth, the heavenly and the earthly, right? So these are the people who are constantly referred to as dwelling on the earth because they have an earthly understanding and their thoughts are earthly, their kingdoms are earthly, their desires are earthly, their lusts are earthly. And even the best of them, even they're limited by an earthly understanding. And it says, in gathering together the waters, he called the seas, right? The seas are the nations and the peoples and the tongues and the kings. And of course, they are those which are founded upon, again, the word of God. And
Mm-hmm.
God saw that it was good, or saw to it that it was good. He saw it to the end, right? And God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, and the seed is in itself upon the earth, and it was so. And again, you're talking about the fleshly things. All flesh is as grass, and the seed, of course, is the word. And each thing after its own kind is its own teaching. For example, it's a seed is something you use to replicate. So in regards to teachings, for example, which are trees, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, etc. They have to do with teachings, right? Men are as trees walking. In other words, they're teachings that are moving throughout time, right? And then the second time, and then he was able to see them clearly, right? So this second time now we can see things clearly and not just as teachings that are moving across time. And he says, and it was so. In the earth he brought forth grass, and herb yielding seed after its kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind, and God saw that it was good. So that's all the teachings and all of the movements of man throughout the age, right? Because again, the earth was void and it's being filled up. And there was evening and morning were the third day. So this is kind of your third clue. This is kind of your third insight. Because he talks about the sevenfold understanding, right, in Enoch. So this is kind of
Mm-hmm.
that. And it says, and God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years, and let them be for lights in the firmament of heaven, and the light give light on the earth. And it was so. So again, we're in this age is the night, and it's ruled, if you will, by the stars, the angels that rule the night, that rule this age. In other words, there is the greater light, of course, and the lesser light, right? Which, of course, the greater light is the sun, and the lesser light is the moon. So, in other words, the idea is that the lesser light is like the fleshly understanding, the earthly understanding, the understanding taught by men, and then, of course, the greater light, as we see, is the teaching from the Bible and the teaching from God. You see, and it says, God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. And he made the stars also, which are the angels. And God set them in the firmament of the heavens to give light upon the earth, right? And to rule over the day and over the night, right? In other words, God's kingdom and the satanic kingdom, right? And God saw that it was good, or in other words, saw to it that this happened, right? He saw it to the end, right? He saw it all the way to the end from the beginning, right? And the evening and the morning were the fourth day, right? So in other words, now you understand there's two kingdoms, right? That's all taught in the Didache, that's all taught in Barnabas, right? And God
Mm-hmm.
said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and the fowl that may fly above the earth, and in the open firmament of heaven. And God created the great whales and every living creature that moveth in the waters, and brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let the fowl multiply in the earth. So in other words, these are kind of like earthly and church rulers and institutions and various sorts of organizations and kingdoms, if you will, of the earth, and the religious establishments, really, in the secular establishments.
Right.
And God made the beasts of the earth after his kind, and the cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And then he said, Let us make man in our image, right? Which was on, let me see. Yeah, let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image, and in the image of light and likeness of God created he them, male and female he created them. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. And God said, Behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat. But anyways, but all of this is happening on the sixth day. And if we're following Barnabas's timeline, again, I'm not saying it strictly follows a timeline. I'm just saying with Barnabas, it ends up there. But the idea is that towards the end of time, right, the answer is going to be given to man. And it's going to be at the cusp between the sixth and the seventh millennium, the sixth and the seventh day. And so the idea is that this is the changing over of mankind into the image of God. In other words, when we go from being the man of the 6 centuries to the man, or the 6th millennia, to the man of the 7th millennium, when we're changed and transformed. And so then they're given, at that point, they're given authority. And you see, like with the Church of Philadelphia, that being the 6th church, for example, is a similar thing where it says that I will make those of the synagogue of Satan come down and worship at your feet. Right. Because that they will have exercised their dominion over them. Right. So over the worldly institutions, in other words. And so this just parallels that. And then, of course, it culminates on the 7th day. Right. So, I mean, I just wanted to bring that up because that was, I think, what Barnabas was leading towards was that it was a progression in time.
I'll read it right here. It says, Barnabas 15:4, Give heed, children, what this meaneth. He endeth in 6 days. He meaneth this, that in 6,000 years the Lord shall bring all things to an end. For a day with him signifieth 1,000 years, and this he himself beareth witness, saying, Behold, the day of the Lord shall be as 1,000 years. Therefore, children, in 6 days, that is in 6,000 years, everything shall come to an end. And I think it's referencing Peter when he says a day is as 1,000 years, when he says, he himself beareth witness in that first part. So it's telling you Peter said it, and then it's telling you that he's talking about the world's going to be over in 6,000 years, which are 6 days, and on the 7th day he rested, which is the Sabbath, which is now 7th day.
Well, yeah, but that's what I'm saying. In other words, if you just take what is written elsewhere and you just apply it to Genesis, that's just how it shakes out. And the fact that you end up basically where Barnabas tells you kind of makes sense. You know what I'm saying? So, but what I'm saying is it's just that it's written all over the scriptures, right? It's more than just the surface level. The darkness exists on the surface, right? The Spirit of God, right, then blows upon the surface of the word.
Yeah, but that's why the super gospel makes so much sense, and that's why the agrapha and all the different quotations from all different people come together the way that it does, is because it's all intertwined. It's something that if you look here, look there, it's all together. Like if you look under a rock, there shall I be. Like it's like everywhere. It's unescapable.
Yeah, it's supposed to be a demonstration of that. That's the
Right.
thing. It really is an effective demonstration of that, because it really just goes to show you just how this was always the plan. Again, the end was at the beginning. The
Hmm.
reason why the end and the beginning are identical is because in language, if you encode something, right, that's the beginning part, right? And then if you decode something, that's the end part, right? But an ideal encode and decode is exact, right?
Right.
Exactly what I'm telling you is exactly what you understand, right? And you just regard that as this. The end is the beginning. In other words, the encoding is the same as the decoding. Once you get to decode that which was encoded, you understand that there's a beginning, you understand that there's an end, and that everything that came between was just confusion and a fog and error, right? And so when the Bible talks about confusion, when it talks about fog, when it talks about the error, right? When it talks about all this stuff, right? It's talking about that middle place. And the gospel of truth goes into that great deal. It talks about the middle, and it talks about the age and the fog. It also talks about the children, the elect, who are going to come at the end of time. Um, and there's a whole set of instructions that go with this stuff too. That's the thing. They tell you kind of what to do, kind of how what your job is. Like with the Philadelphians, their job is to deal with the Laodiceans who don't care, right? He says to the Philadelphians, right? Because they're right there at the same time at as the Laodiceans are, because they're there to rescue the Laodiceans from their apathy and to show them the truth, right? Which is
Hmm.
demonstrated by the fact that in the one he says, "Look, I have placed before you an open door, right? And no man can shut it, because you have had a little bit of strength, right? And you've seen how little strength it takes to open that door, right?
Right.
But how very few there are who find it." Um, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Labyrinth, if
Yeah,
you've
I've
ever
seen it.
seen that, right?
Yeah.
Remember they're in the labyrinth and they're walking past a certain place. You just cannot see that the wall is not there. Like they just
Yeah.
think there's a wall there, and then
Right.
a worm-like creature stops them and tells them, no, it's here, right? And you, for all the world, you can't see it, but sure enough, you step into it and there you are, and there is no wall, and it's like, wow, how
Right.
did that happen, right?
Right.
Because it's just like that. It's just like, no, there's no wall, there's no canon, it doesn't exist. It's something that's been imposed and shoehorned in, that is it's a curse, really. I mean, it's something that preserves, but at the same time destroys. Like
Right.
it keeps it for a later age. It stores that meaning up while history or whatever's filling in all the gaps and filling in all the, it's buying itself time for all of the prophecies within it to come true, so that when it is finally understood in retrospect, the end matches the beginning. And you
Right.
and you clearly recognize at that point, whether you're a Christian or an atheist, you clearly recognize that there is a being that had to have prior knowledge and prior power to have pulled this off.
Right. It's too much for
That
anybody to
has
know. Yeah, it
pulled
had to
this
be God.
off.
Yeah, it had to be God.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that it has happened. Once you realize it has happened, then it's like you're living in a different world. Then it's like, oh yeah, it's like it says in Diognetus, when you come to recognize that there is someone who is operative in the heavens, right?
Yeah.
You begin to dilate on their mysteries, right? You understand what he's talking about, because you
Yeah.
realize, no, now I understand that there's a God that's operating. I understand that that is a fact, regardless of whether you believe it or not. This is the thing, right? And this is happening. And that's what's important. People need to share, and people need to come to these understandings themselves, so that they can share them with other people, so that they can pass the message on. Because one of the things that Peter says is we have the power to speed his coming,
I know.
right?
I think about that all the
Hasten his
time.
coming, right? Because he gives us the tools to do that. He
Right.
literally is saying, here it is, right?
Right.
Once you get that old time as antediluvian, right, then I'm telling you, the antediluvian prophets are inspired by the Holy Spirit, right?
Right.
Once you get that, right, that when we told you, myself and Jude and probably the other apostles too, right, when we all collectively who were sent by Yeshua, right, we were sent by Jesus, and we told you about the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. And Jude told you, behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment. I'm telling you that we, the apostles, taught you that.
Right.
That's how easy it is. That's how little strength it takes to open that door.
I
That's
know.
how tiny little grain of mustard seed can grow into the biggest of all trees, the greatest tree, the tree of knowledge. You see what I'm
Right.
saying? Of the truth, the tree of wisdom, right?
Right.
That's the greatest tree because it encompasses everything. That's the greatest teaching because it encompasses everything, right? The idea is that it's an all-encompassing knowledge that has been given to us by way of the key that Peter gave us, right?
Hmm.
And it proves Yeshua's words to be true, right? So it becomes incumbent upon us to recognize that we are the elect, we are the Philadelphians, and the world out there, those are the Laodiceans. You need
Right.
to find a way to make them care because he speaks to them too. He talks about the door. I've laid before you an open door. He is the door. He is the logos. He's opened up the scriptures to us, in other words, that
Right.
we can explain it, right? It says that in the book of me, right? Explain it to them with your knowledge. For you are a guide upon the earth, right? Speak to those who dwell on the earth. Those are the Laodiceans. Those are the people who just don't care, right?
Hmm.
So this is the congregation of the elect, right? Who have received the crown and they have received the open door. And then Yeshua says further to the Laodiceans who exist with us in time, right? That behold, I stand at that door and knock. And if you
Right.
let me in, I will come in and I will sup with you. I will eat this spiritual food with you, right?
Right.
If you'll just open up that door of understanding, right?
Right.
If you then have the open door like the Philadelphians have, right?
Hmm.
Because it's right there. You see what I'm saying? It all
Yeah.
comes together when you understand it,
Right.
right? But again, it's going to happen when it's going to happen. I've sort of had to reconcile myself with the fact that I've been saying this for 30 years. I mean, you can go back to my earliest videos, and
Yeah. I
this
know.
is this is basically what I'm saying. I mean, I think it's become a little more nuanced, and I've grown a little bit since then. But fundamentally, the idea that with much wisdom comes much sorrow, I understand because you're talking to walls, you're talking to, it doesn't always result in people understanding because whatever. But I feel like at this point in time people are starting to be less complacent and
Yeah.
less apathetic, which is the
I,
thing that held the Laodiceans back because they're all fat and happy and
yeah.
self-satisfied, and so they're not looking for an answer because they don't really realize that there's a problem. When it
Right.
has to be when they realize that there's a problem, like it says in the Shepherd of Hermas, right? The wealthy will only understand when their riches are taken away from them,
Yep.
right? Will they understand? Or will they be useful for the building of the building? In other words, right? In
Yeah.
other words, God can't use them until their riches are taken away from them, right? This
Right.
is part of what this does. This undermines. See, this is the greatest boon that the church could ever have. I mean, this validates the gospel that they're preaching, except for their oversight.
Hmm.
So again, they only really have to shift a little bit. They only need a little bit of strength to open that door. He's saying, "Look, I'm knocking at the door. Just open up."
Yeah,
Right?
but that's the thing though. If Christians have a lot of knowledge of the Bible, a lot of people have memorized a lot of the Bible. So if they just took these principles and this understanding and used what they already know, then it would be very powerful because when you know the canon really well, it helps you to understand all these other things because they all match each other. So basically, you're just doing a matching game of all the stuff they took out, mixed with all the stuff that's God's Testament, the Old Testament, and Jesus's Testament, the New Testament. Then you have the Holy Spirit's Testament, and it all makes sense. It all links together. So it's really, like you're saying, it's not going to take a lot. They just have to take off the blinders, basically.
Peter gives us the key. He gives us the strength to do this. And I think Second Peter and Jude are, like I said before, they're the foot in the door. We need to spread the message. Like, I mean, just corporately, anybody out there, not just you, not just me, but I mean,
Yeah.
we as a whole, we as Christians, it is incumbent upon us. It is our duty to speak the truth if we know the truth, right? To shout it from the rooftops. That isn't to say we can't use discretion, but when the opportunity is presented to us, right, we have to be able to speak the truth and live with a clear mind and a clear conscience, especially when it regards to this. Because, if nothing else, you need to be faithful to the truth above all, because
Mhm.
that's the beginning and the end is the truth. To come
Right.
to that knowledge, it is the alpha and the omega. It is the whole thing encompassed, you know. And so if it sounds like a lot, it kind of is a lot, but it's also very simple. And it also
Right.
very, very much boils down to some very simple little things that if you just allow them, all of a sudden, again, it's the little things. Well, you can't be faithful in little things. Who will give you great things? That is
Right.
to say that the way to get at the great things is to not stumble over the little things. That's
Right.
what it's essentially telling you. If you want to get the great things, you have to be able to be trustworthy in small things. And that's not what you get when you say Enoch is not ancient. It's not what you get when you say he's not a prophet. That's not what you get when you say that his prophecies aren't relevant, or what I'm saying, or the book that's named and claimed in the Bible or whatever is not. When you invalidate the word of God, and again, I think there's some level for forgiveness for people, because again, if you speak against the Holy Spirit, right?
Mhm.
That Holy Spirit is that knowledge, right?
Right.
That looking at it's part of it is that knowledge. It gives you that spiritual awareness of it. It's a whole lot more than just that.
Right.
But see, that's why he says you can blaspheme against the Father and you can blaspheme against the Son. But what's that distinction? Because the reason why is because the Father is sort of like the prophecies of the Old Testament, mentioning the Son and mentioning the elect
Right.
by their three items in the Ark of the Covenant, because they're symbolic. One is Moses, one is Aaron, who's our spiritual high priest, or our earthly high priest that corresponds with our spiritual high priest, right?
Right.
So, and then that third thing is the jar of manna, which is a future tense, because I will give you to eat of the hidden manna as a function of overcoming this
Right.
deception, right? So, in other
Mhm.
words, the deception is that which keeps you from the hidden manna, the hidden scriptures. And when you overcome that, then you get to eat of it, right?
Right.
That's essentially what's encapsulated in that. But the idea is that there's a threefold revelation: one of the Father, one of the Son, and one of the Holy Spirit. And so the first two people are destined to get wrong. In other words, they're destined to be wrong on that. That's even God's will that they're wrong on that, because he wants
Mhm.
people's eyes held until a certain point at which the Holy Spirit is revealed.
Right.
At that point, at that point, if you want to invalidate God's word, at that point, if you want to invalidate the scriptures, right, you do so at your own peril, because it is neither on earth nor in heaven. The
Right.
angels or you, not man, not angel, can be forgiven that, right?
Right.
So when the angels get together and they inspire men to negate what the Bible has said, and they inspire against the truth, because again, what you found was that people were killed because they knew the truth. That there was an
Mhm.
active there was sort of an active movement against the apostles. There had to have been, right? You see, for example, in Third John, how Diotrephes, he says, who loves to have the preeminence, right, would
Right.
not accept, not the apostle John, literally the apostle John.
I
You know
know.
what I'm saying? Can you imagine
True.
at a church the apostle
Right.
John shows up,
I
and what do
know.
you have prating words to speak against him? You know what I'm saying? What is
Yeah, I
that?
do. I
What is
know.
that? They clearly faced in their own lifetimes, they clearly faced opposition, right? I made this point at church earlier today about um, the way in which Peter and the rest of the apostles, the King James Version, I think, calls them ignorant men, but what it means is unlearned men, right?
Right.
Men did not go to college, let's say. They were fishermen,
Right.
right? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I
Bishop,
do.
and then you go to college, it's like, yeah, it's a peaceful life, right? I mean,
Right,
it doesn't add up, right? They
right.
obviously, but see that probably made them easy pickings for the intellectual types who like to say, well, Enoch clearly is not as old as all that.
Yeah, but people
People,
do that still. People do that still because you can't even start a ministry these days unless you get your like degree as in seminary. Like they won't let you. Most people won't even like hire you at a church as the pastor unless you got like some type of degree. Like
you see,
I've seen it happen constantly.
you see how these are systems that have been set in place by
Right,
Satan
right.
by means of the dark arts that he employed, the deep things of Satan. In other words, a lot
Hmm.
of the canon, for example, um, it could be understood as one of the deep things of Satan, because what it was okay. So if you take it at face value that they were reading these books, right? If you just
Hmm.
take it as face value, what does that mean? What does that imply? It means that all the Son of Man stuff that you read in the book of Enoch, that's what Jesus was talking about when he said this, well, that's what was alluded to when it was said that this is my son, the elect one.
Right.
That title is very specific to Enoch, right? So, in other words, he's saying that this is the Enochian figure here, right?
Hmm.
So, in other words, a lot of what his basis is based on Enoch, right? So, if
Right.
you just come to recognize that that is the case, and that he chose the apostles and he gave them teachings, and
Hmm.
among the teachings that he gave them, at least, were that the book of Enoch is valid, that it is ancient, that it is inspired by the Holy Spirit. Again, prophets of old spake as they were moved by the Holy Spirit. Prophets of antediluvian time, in other words, spake as they were moved by the Holy Spirit. This comes from Peter.
Hmm.
So it's an apostolic teaching. But you can see how the intellectuals would have reacted to that. You're going to listen to a simple old man. He's a fisherman. Jesus didn't teach that. He's obviously lost it. These
Right.
guys have lost it, right? The truth is what the Jews over here from the synagogue of Satan over here, in other words, were teaching us, that there is this thing called a canon, right? You need to adhere to it. You need to, we need to say that certain things are certain in or and certain things are out based on the fact that this is in conformity with what came before. This is
Hmm.
why the dragon in Revelation was fatally wounded with the sword, the word of God, but then came back to life, right? Because that old idea that the canon was wrong,
Hmm.
and the Christians saw through that, and all of a sudden they were alive in the spirit because they were freed from that canon,
Hmm.
right? They were then again ensnared in that canon, right? It was
Right.
the same thing as before. Man deciding what God's word is rather than letting God speak his word as, what I'm saying?
Right.
The fact that we stifle Jude, the fact that we, as a consequence, have to distort Second Peter
Hmm.
means something that it's not. They say, "Oh, this is against the Gnostics" or something like that. They'll
Right.
make up stuff, right? But clearly, the writing is on the wall. This is speaking about those people who attacked the apostolic teaching, and the apostolic teaching was the Book of Enoch, among others.
Well, you know what? You know when you said that sometimes you find stuff in footnotes, like for instance, if they do a reference to Enoch, it's in the footnotes or something like that, and you go to find it, and sometimes it's not there because they're not sending you to the right places and stuff like that because they don't have the books. Well, I found this in passing. I've mentioned it in a previous video, but I didn't actually read it. But this is from Exodus, and it's Exodus 23:20. And the reason I found this is because there was a typo in one of the books I was reading, and I had to refine why it wasn't in what I was looking for. So we have to understand that in Exodus, by the time Israel was escaping Egypt, Enoch was already gone. He was already translated to heaven as the angel Metatron, which is spoken of in like third Enoch. So this is what it says. And now I am sending an angel before you to guard you on your way and to bring you to the place I have prepared. Heed him and listen to his voice. Do not defy him. He will not pardon your rebelliousness, for my authority rests in him. See, now my authority rests in him. That is something that happened in third Enoch because God transformed. Enoch into the angel Metatron and put his name on his like forehead, on his crown, basically, and then opened up all the gates of understanding and grace and mercy and all these things to Enoch at the amount of like 365,000 like portions or whatever. So then it goes on to say, if you will only listen to his voice and do all, and listen to what it said, if you will only listen to his voice, speaking of Metatron, and do all I tell you. So God is literally saying that he is speaking through the angel Metatron, which is Enoch. Then I shall be an enemy to your enemies, and I shall harass those who harass you. My angel will go before you and bring you to the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Canaanites, and Hivites, and Jebusites, which all of those are the offspring of the giants that came from Og of Bashan when Noah saved him through the flood, because there was only one giant left after the flood. So anyways, I just wanted to show people that Enoch is actually in our, like, part of the Old Testament, even after he was translated, but people just don't give it any credit because they took the footnotes out to tell you that that was Enoch that saved all the people of Israel. And what's interesting is that his wings are, Enoch's wings are what shade the people of Israel, including that cloud or whatever that came over them to hide them from the sun, so they'd be protected during their travels. But Enoch had like something like 72 wings, it says in 3rd Enoch, so that his wings are like hovering over the people to protect them from all the things that happen going through the desert. And just people don't think about that type of stuff. Like how much was Enoch involved? He protected God's chosen people. That's how involved he was with, and we took the book out. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, it's an interesting angle. I like that. There's this constant validation of the book of Enoch as well. I mean, Genesis 6:1-4, strangely, is virtually identical with Enoch 6:1-4. It's as if they were the same thing, and the fact that they have the same versification is like, okay,
Right.
how did that happen? I mean, did they have? I mean, I don't know. It just seems a little. It kind of stretches credulity, but the point of it is it goes way back. It goes all the way to the beginning, because again, the Old Testament that we have, it was all images. It speaks of in Hebrews. It was all images and shadows of things to come. And so, in other words, the fact is that if you're going to have a spiritual level and a fleshly level, both things have to function, right? The one has to be couched in the other, so that in the fullness of time, it can then be raised up from an earthly level to a heavenly level. Because that's the first understanding. In the first place, there is the heavenly and there is the earthly, right? Second thing you got to know is that there's a separation between books, right? There's a separation, right? And the next thing you got to know, there's a separation between the world and you know what I'm saying? So you kind of
Well, Jesus said that. Jesus said that in the Super Gospel, in the part where he's talking to John in the cave. He says that the reason that he came as a man was to show us the spiritual maxims, is because as men we can only understand something like basically from a man. So then he does it in the manly sense so that we can understand it in the Christ sense, like the higher level. So it's like a higher level back down to an earthly, and earthly back up to a heavenly. It's like they both go like back and forth on each other.
Well, see, this is a different kind of experience than just reading. Like you can read and learn and understand things and follow logic and understand things in a nuanced kind of way or whatever. But the Bible is a little bit different because number one, because it's all in pictures and images. So everything's kind of reduced to the least common denominator. We've spoken of this before. If you speak of lamps, every language has a word for lamp. If you speak of rocks, every nation has a word for rocks. If you speak of wind, every it's going to be a universal language of things, objects. Those are images, right? But the images themselves are speaking beyond themselves, because again, the heavenly is couched in the earthly. So if the earthly is the image and the heavenly has fitted itself in there, right? At some point, because it's still in there, you can let go of the earthly and the heavenly will come out of it. Right. Because the idea is that it's couched in earthly terminology, right? And so you have the light that is for the children of the day, and you have the light, if you will, the lesser knowledge for the children of the night, right? because when you walk at night, you stumble because, you don't have the light of the day, right?
Right.
The day is kind of a realization. It's kind of a deep realization. See, if you're a Christian, and let's pretend for a minute this is your first time hearing this, because I imagine there's probably one or two people out there who will be seeing this. This is the first time hearing this.
Hmm.
If you're able to follow it, it pulls you out of a whole paradigm. It causes you to see through an illusion, right? And it
Right.
has the power to raise you from the earthly to a heavenly perspective if you just allow it, right? If you
Right.
just look at it and let that happen. Just understanding it should do that. It's more than, it's why it says in the Gospel of Philip, it's more than just letters and characters that a person could read and say, "Oh, I understand that."
Yeah.
No, it pulls you out. This is a work and a wonder. He's called the end from the beginning. So when you see the decoding and you see the encoding, what you're seeing is a being that has the power to deliver us from the bondage of this age and from
Right.
this world, and has done it. So
Hmm.
once you recognize that it is in effect a de facto occurrence, even if you're a skeptic, even if you're an atheist, that's got to leave you with a profound sense of how in the world did that happen?
Right. Right. Right.
You know
Seriously.
what I'm saying? That's how it's beyond it. That's how it's beyond words, because
Hmm.
it's something. It is not just that. It is something that isn't subject to your thought. It's subject to your reason, is subject to your acceptance or rejection. It is
Right.
something that has happened. And it said that it would do this. And then when you see that it did do that, when you see that it has happened,
You
that
can't
everything
deny it.
that was cited in prospect
Yeah.
is understood in retrospect, you understand the fulfillment, you understand
Mhm.
the completion, right? It
Right.
means that this is judgment, because when believer and unbeliever both come to understand, then it's a bad day for the unbeliever, right?
Right. So they got to make a
People,
choice at that point. They have to
yeah,
make a choice,
but I mean,
right?
that's the thing, though. I mean, what's the timetable? It might be. I don't know if it's flexible. It does say we have the time, the ability to speed his coming. We
Right. Right.
understand
So
this.
it's up to
You
us.
know, there is a set time. I mean, the Legion. Well, the Legion said, "Have you come to destroy us before the time?" So
Right.
they knew that at 4,000 years, it wasn't the time yet.
Yeah, and I think the Wisdom of Solomon says also that like there God has set everything according to timetables and things like that, and He has everything weighed out in measures or something like that.
But he tells us how much time is left. Remember,
Right.
the he tells us that he cast the legion out into the pigs, the swines, and they all went into the lake, right? And where
Right.
they drowned. But it says that there were 2,000 of them.
Right.
So that's 2,000 years, a pig
So we
for every
got.
year. And the pigs have to do with Christianity too, by the way, because you'll notice that pigs and dogs are used together. Like in the
Right.
Gospel of Thomas, it says that the Pharisees, right? So holding that thought, are like dogs. So they're comparing Pharisees to dogs, right? So you get the dog part because
Hmm.
they sit on the trough and they neither eat what is in the trough, nor do they let the cattle eat, which are the lay Jews. They
Hmm.
don't let them eat it, right? So what is the food that they don't let them eat, right? It's
Right.
the non-sanctioned scriptures. So that's the dog returning to his own vomit,
Hmm.
right? So that's Judaism going back to Judaism after it had been that that the word had been engrafted, right? We talked about that, and the light had shone, right? And the sword, if you will, had slain the head of that particular dragon, right? Seven
Right.
heads, 7,000 years, right? So that had been accomplished, but because they went back and went and did the canon thing again, they managed to pull it off. Then it came back to life again, right?
Right.
But then the okay, but then you see, okay, dogs, and where do you see dogs and swine together? You see them together all the time, right? Like, for example, do not cast your pearls before swine. Do not give
Right.
what is sacred to dogs, right? So we
Right.
established that the swine, that there were 2,000 of them to correspond with the Christian age, or the 2,000 years that were left, right?
Hmm.
That, and then the swine are the Christians. That's the Christian age, and the dogs he says the Pharisees are like dogs, sitting atop the cattle manger. So the Pharisees are likened to the dogs. So these are the Christians and the Jews, right?
Right.
Who are being talked about. So when it says, for example, that the dog returns to his own vomit, he's very specifically talking about the Jews, because the Pharisees are like dogs. See, right? The Pharisees return back to their own teaching or their own vomit, or what comes out of their mouth, right?
Right.
And then the swine, the sow that was once cleaned, right, by the word, right? So the Christians that once had the word wash them clean, right? They go back to their wallowing in the mud. And what is
Right.
the mud, right? Well, mud is earth and water, right? So it's the earthly mixed with the water, right?
Mhm.
It muddies things, right? So for example, where you see um the
It says it in
Christian church
Barnabas 10.
denying.
It says it in Barnabas 10:3 also. Accordingly, he mentioned the swine with this intent. Thou shalt not cleave, saith he, to such men who are like unto swine. That is, when they are in luxury, they forget the Lord, but when they are in want, they recognize the Lord. Just as the swine, when it eateth, knoweth not his Lord, but when it is hungry, it crieth out, and when it has received food again, it is silent. So, like, that's a spiritual thing, talking about like the word of God, basically.
Well, they didn't want. See, the thing was, people like Antipas, right? The name Antipas means I'm against you all,
Yeah.
right? So the faithful servant is one who's against the whole world. Let God be true and every man a liar, right?
Right.
So the idea was that this person was being persecuted because he knew the truth, and
Right.
because he was accurate in his accusations against them, just like Stephen, right? He stood up to them, and he had to have stood out. I mean, we don't know what this is, and I mean, I don't know that he's necessarily over and above other Christian martyrs, but he had to have stood out to have been called out by name
Right.
as a very specific example, right? So you got to know that whoever Antipas was, he was God was definitely in his corner,
Right.
whatever he
Right.
was saying, right? And it's not hard to understand how standing up for the apostles could have got you in trouble, for
Yep.
standing up for the original teaching, and especially because they wanted the world for themselves. Look, it was the dragon who suffered the injury and then recovered, right? So
Mhm.
who the hidden hand? What is the force that you see? Again, it's the synagogue of Satan. Then it's the seed of Satan, right?
Yeah.
Then it's the children and the practices, eating food sacrificed to idols. In other words, you eat the scriptures, but they're sacrificed to the idol of the canon, which doesn't exist,
Right.
right? And then
Exactly.
spiritual fornication. Again, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? You adulterers and adulteresses, right?
Right. Spiritual
That's
adultery.
spiritual adultery, to be
Right.
friends with the world, right? Be friends with the world is to be enmity with God. And you can see that all of the people who would have wanted to be in good standing with the Jews, have things nice and smooth with them, have things nice and smooth with society, those are cowards. The people who
Right.
wanted greed and things for themselves, right? Well, they're greedy, and their lusts, their God is their belly, right? Or, I mean, just on and on and on. You can see the parallels here as to why it would be that they might take advantage of and seize upon the vulnerability of the apostles. Because again, with the atrophies in John, the fear. I mean, the apostle. I don't know. He just keeps saying this, but he had his head on Yeshua's chest, right? He was
Right.
the apostle whom Jesus loved, right?
I know.
And here's this guy's like, no, no, you stay out. Your people stay out, and he prates against them, right?
Right.
What
Right. But what was the purpose of his church then if he's casting out the one person that was actually leaning on Jesus' chest, listening to what he had to say inside
Oh,
of it?
I can tell you why. Because he loved to have the preeminence. In other words, it's ego. The well, here's what presumably, if you take as an article of faith at this point that Peter was preaching the book of Enoch, and he was calling it not a cleverly concocted fable. When
Right.
we, the apostles, plural, right, told you about the power and the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. Again, that was when Jude said, behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment upon all. and to convict all that are ungodly. See, that's the power and the judgment. That's the power
Yeah.
and you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So the coming and the power, if you will, of the Lord. That's what he's saying. So when he's saying that, when we told you that, which is quoted from the book of Enoch, we
Right.
weren't just quoting some cleverly concocted fable, as
Right.
if to say the book of Enoch is, in their minds, a cleverly concocted fable. So we know what the enemies are saying. We know
Hmm.
that the enemies aren't owning the source, but Jude is. He's owning it by name. Enoch, the seventh from Adam. They're not giving him his antiquity. The apostles are,
Yeah, but
right?
when you take all the substance out of the word, you're left with the fluff of what's in the current denominations of the church, because they don't teach anything that, in my opinion, is of a value that would
Because it's
change the lives
superficial.
of people. Right, but it doesn't
Darkness is
have
on the super
it, does,
the superficial.
it doesn't have the power though that this does, of like changing people's lives. Like this changed my life. Like that's what I'm saying. Like it literally changed my whole life. You
Yeah,
know
it
what I
changed
mean?
me too. It's an amazing thing.
Right. So um, I think that's a good point to end, Robert. Want to give your website. If anybody, depending on whose channel you're going to watch this on, mine or Robert's, my channel is the Carpenter's Son on YouTube, and on TikTok it's the same for Carpenter's Son, the Carpenter's Son. And then Robert's website is scriptural-truth.com, and his YouTube channel is Apocryphile 1970. And on his website, you can download PDF or MP3 versions of most of the books that have been removed. And the Super Gospel full audio is on his YouTube channel, as well as another large work that he did, the guidebook for the elect, which explains how Enoch is to be used to teach the elect how to preach this to the world. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments for either Robert or I. And we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Thank you, Robert, for doing this show today. I really appreciate it. And God bless your church series. I'm really enjoying watching that.
Well, again, I'm so glad to be able to do it. I'm glad I had the chance. I could definitely see God's hand in all of this.
Me too.
You know, and it is an amazing thing. If you do go to the website, it's run by friend of mine, a fellow YouTuber named Jesus Love 723. Again, he does it on his own dime. He does it on his own time. Nobody that I deal with I don't have formal ties with anybody. I don't have formal involvement in anything. So you'd be helping him out and helping to perpetuate it. If you want to do that, you can always donate in his direction. Also, the church that I go to, if you are enjoying the videos and can see that, you know, a lot of big things start out small. A lot of really big movements start out from humble beginnings, and you can kind of see that. But you know, at the end of all of those videos, I also, you know, give their address, you know, and if you feel moved, you know, you could maybe help them out. There are certain kinds of things that we have to do even just to get, you know, up to code on the building. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? So again, I'm not asking for myself. And the Didache points out it's not a sin if you ask for someone else. So, you know,
No, no.
definitely on their behalf.
What's
And
what's the
as
name of the
far as,
church, Robert? What's the name of the church?
oh, it's called the King of Saints, and it's in Cleveland, Texas. I don't have the address just handy.
Oh, that's
Might
okay.
check
No,
it
that's
out.
fine. I'll put it
Um,
in my comment section after. I'll
I
find
can
it.
actually, yeah, I can actually look it up on Google. But anyways, but I mean, as far as that's concerned, what I'm saying is, you know, again, we're not looking for handouts or anything. We're just looking to survive. But you know, it's a good place, like I said, to start out.
Hmm.
And I think that they're kind of like the Bereans there. Um, you know, everybody there kind of is a teacher. They're very well educated and stuff, and they're taking to this stuff and understanding it, you know,
Yeah,
and they're able
you
to
can hear them
articulate it
talking.
back because it's, yeah, but just the fact that it's in a church environment, I think it's
Yeah.
just a good object lesson to show that it can be done, that it's not something that's impossible. And you know, it may not be something that takes roots right away in the mega churches and stuff like that, but you know, little church gatherings or something, I think that's very important for a certain spiritual point of view, that we as people are getting together in small groups
Right.
among believers, among people who can understand, and that we have these different little nuclei all over the place. If we could
Yeah.
get these kinds of things going on, then we can get a movement going on, because this is like a happening, and
Right.
it is happening. You can, and this is what I'm saying. You can see that it is happening. You know what
Right.
I'm saying? So if we want to speed his coming, we can clearly see that that's in our hands to do.
Right.
So we should use our hands to further God's purposes and do his works and to speak his words, and to
Amen.
put up with whatever slings and arrows that it takes in order to make sure that this happens. Because the world as we see it is coming to an end. Just the sheer confidence in the world is already crumbling.
Right.
This is the death blow.
Right.
If you really want to sink the dagger into this beast, right, and kill it once and for all, he's given us the tools. And I think the onus is on us. I think there's a reason why it's spelled that way, because
Right.
it's us, right?
Right.
It is for us to do. And I've prayed to him, I don't know how many times, about, can I have the help? Can I get and
Right.
always the answer seems to be, I have given you what it takes to do the job,
Right.
right? Just get out there and fight the good fight, right? And whatever happens, happens. And I've come to understand the wisdom in that. He's got his own timing, but you want to make sure that when that day comes, you have done what you could, towards these ends,
Yeah.
because there are rewards waiting for the elect. There are exaltations coming. There are going to
Hmm.
be changes in us corporately as a people.
Hmm.
And I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm kind of done with things the way they are. You
Yeah.
know,
I am too.
Paul talks about that. We've had our chance to revel in this world and to do things we wanted to do. You know, what's it all leading to, right? You can see that reason has been abandoned, that
Hmm.
that civility has been abandoned. Everything that we would look to as a secular or even a religious framework is just falling apart and disintegrating. But what isn't falling apart, what isn't disintegrating, what is coming into view,
The word of
what is
God.
materializing, is the truth from God. You
Right.
can see that the Jerusalem that is above is coming down to replace, as Paul puts it, the Jerusalem that is below.
Right.
Right. So we are the true Jerusalem. We are the heavenly Jerusalem. We are those who, spiritually anyway, with the mind of Christ, dwell in heaven.
Hmm.
That is our true home, you see. And by being that here on earth, then that draws this down the faster. And I think, that again, if you take what is here and you build on it, if it's a solid foundation that you can build on it, if you can lend your talents to it, if you can teach, if you can preach, if you have the time and the energy to do preaching ministries on the street corners or whatever, just whatever you can do. Maybe you have a talent, maybe you can paint, maybe you can draw, maybe you can sing, maybe you can speak, maybe you can stand up and debate. Maybe you can do. I mean, there's lots of things. What God has given you, but the point
Right.
is, the elect is 10,000s of His saints. It's not any one person.
Right.
He's always in the plural, and it's always in the thousands upon thousands upon thousands. So don't
Right.
think you can't be one.
Right.
Don't think you can't be a light, because he's going to pour out his spirit, and you can see that he is already doing that. If you see what I'm saying, if you see what we're talking about here, you understand it and you recognize it and you understand the implications of that, then I think you understand what your role in this should be, right?
Hmm.
And if you don't, then maybe you should pray on it, because I believe everybody has something to contribute.
I
You
do
know,
too.
it doesn't have to be to me. It doesn't have to be to him. It doesn't have to be to my institutions, my friends, my whatever. It just has to be towards the cause.
Right.
And we understand that it's common cause. And it's something that was once and for all delivered to the saints, so we can claim it. If we
Absolutely.
have God's backing on this, and so anything we do that we know that is according to His will, and we know this is according to His will, we know that our prayers will be heard.
Right.
So
Absolutely. Thank you, Robert. I appreciate it. God bless you.
thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It was a great
Appreciate
show.
it.
Thank you so much for your
Always
time.
nice
Appreciate
to
it.
have a conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks. And I look forward to hearing that new show that you have coming up about the new church ministry that you're doing.
All right. Thank you.
God bless.